Let's continue to talk about the microbes in your large intestine. Additional research has been done on understanding the microbes in your large intestine to see how they might influence how drugs are affecting your body. This is especially important, and some studies have indicated this is true, with chemotherapy drugs that treat cancer. These drugs, it does seem, to be altered by the microbes that live in your large intestine. And in some individuals, it makes the chemotherapy drugs more or less effective depending on what types of microbes they have in their large intestine. Not only that, but historically, people used to have worms in their large intestine. And those worms may interact with the bacteria in your large intestine and together influence the development of allergies. Lastly, the bacteria in your large intestine may play a role in forming colon cancer. Again, a plant-based diet which encourages the growth of a diverse set of bacteria could help reduce the risk of colon cancer. Most of the microbes in the large intestine are anaerobic, and that's because they live in an area of the body that's not exposed to oxygen. They make up roughly 10 to 30% of your fecal volume or your poop. And again, I want to emphasize that your resident microflora in your large intestine are generally helpful. They make vitamins for you, help digest food, and convert some sugars. They're also responsible for contributing to intestinal odor, such as gas, and in some individuals are responsible for lactose intolerance. In fact, if you are able to drink milk or consume lactose, that sugar from the milk is able to pass down your esophagus, into your stomach, and into your small intestine where you digest that sugar. If you're lactose intolerant, that sugar passes through your small intestine untouched and ends up in your large intestine. That sugar in your large intestine is then digested by the bacteria in your large intestine, and as a result of digesting that lactose sugar, they produce gas and intestinal discomfort, making people lactose intolerant. So it's the fact that the individuals who are lactose intolerant don't digest the lactose themselves in the small intestine and allow the bacteria to digest it in the large intestine that results in that intestinal discomfort. Well, I think that's about all that we know right now about microbes in the large intestine, but this information is changing on a regular basis. So stay tuned in the coming years and you'll discover even more about what these microbes do. But what we're going to do now is move on to the bacteria of the respiratory tract. The respiratory tract generally does not have a lot of microbes in it, but the microbes that do live in your respiratory tract are found in the upper respiratory tract. As you can see here, there are no microbes in the lower respiratory tract. Most of the microbes in your respiratory tract are streptococci. They are also found not only in your nasal cavity, but your mouth and the pharynx, which is where the digestive tract and respiratory tract converge, and then also the larynx, which is exclusively used for your respiratory tract, as well as your trachea. Any microbes that do end up in the lower respiratory tract, like the bronchus or bronchioles, get caught in mucus and end up getting pushed back up out of the lower respiratory tract, trapped in that mucus, by small hair-like particles known as cilia. Those bacteria are then pushed up into the pharynx, where, if you were to clear your throat, those microbes in that mucus then are placed into the digestive tract from the pharynx and swallowed into your stomach. The respiratory tract where there are microbes, the upper respiratory tract, does have some resident microflora, but not many. In fact, very few species can live in the upper respiratory tract. Finally, let's talk about the flora of your genitourinary tract. These are bacteria and microbes that live in your genitalia. The genitourinary tract here for women shows you where microbes can be found. So in the front here is your urethra and bladder, and you can see microbes can enter sort of the start of the urethra, and we'll talk about why they don't go much higher. They're also found in the vagina, but not any higher than that. This is your uterus. And then, of course, as we talked about, there are many microbes that live in your large intestine. This is the end of the large intestine known as the rectum and the anus. This is the genitourinary tract of men. As you can see, microbes inhabit the surface of the skin, specifically underneath the foreskin, if one is still present. And microbes can enter a little bit of the urethra, but again, don't go much higher. They also have microbes in the rectum and the anus, just like females do. Generally, as you can see, the reproductive organs, the testes and ovaries, are kept sterile. Other areas of the body, like the kidney and the bladder, are also kept microbe-free. Now, the way that the bladder is kept microbe-free is by the constant release of urine. The more you pee, the more it washes the microbes out of the urethra and prevents them from traveling up and into your bladder. This is why, if anybody's ever been diagnosed by urinary tract infections, one of the solutions to prevent them from happening again is to just drink a lot of water. As you can see, the urethra in females is much shorter than the urethra in males. So here's the urethra in males. In order to get to the bladder, the microbes would need to swim all that distance. This makes females far more susceptible to urinary tract infections than males. As far as keeping the reproductive organs sterile, in men, the urethra is also the same tube as that's connected to the testes. So this turns into the vas deferens here, and you can see the length of this tube. It would be almost impossible for microbes to make that full distance. With females, it's a different area of the body. We have the vagina here, which does not only find resident microflora, but as we discussed earlier, your body encourages the growth of the lactobacilli there. And that's to prevent the growth of pathogens. But why don't they travel any farther up into the uterus? The reason why is because there is an opening to the uterus called the cervix. The cervix is generally kept fairly closed to prevent microbes from traveling into the uterus, where a developing embryo and fetus may one day be. That cervix is only going to open in two cases. One, during menstruation, to allow menstrual fluid to leave the uterus and get into the vagina, or two, during childbirth. And it's in fact the dilation of the cervix that leads to pain associated with PMS, cramping, and childbirth, labor pains. So that's it for the genitourinary tract. As you can see, in areas where there's more moisture, like under the foreskin or in the labia, the vulva, the external reproductive organs, you're going to have a lot more microbes there because that's part of the mucous membranes of the skin that we talked about before. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lecture on bacteria in your body and you're a little less concerned about bacteria in your body. The only real concern is those transient microflora that could end up causing disease. But your resident microflora, unless there's an unusual case of them getting to a different area of the body where they shouldn't be, or your immune system becoming compromised, you really should be very thankful that they're there because they're helping you stay strong, digest your food, and remain healthy.